US President Donald Trump says he's ready to impose a second stage of sanctions against Moscow after Russia launched its biggest aerial assault on Ukraine since the war began. Sunday's attack saw hundreds of drones and missiles rain down across Ukraine, killing at least 4 people. And the airstrikes hit something untouched by previous attacks, a key government building.
The smoke seen here is rising from the building that houses Ukraine's cabinet of ministers. For the first time in more than 3 years of war, Russian strikes have damaged a government building in the heart of capital Kyiv. More than 800 drones pummeled the country overnight, according to Ukraine's Air Force, the largest ever air attack of its kind. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's assaults are becoming more brazen.
This is a clear sign that Putin is testing the world. Will the world accept this? It is important that the statements of leaders, states and institutions are followed up with strong actions, sanctions against Russia, against individuals associated with Russia, and strong tariffs and other restrictions on trade.
Elsewhere in the capital, streams of people were evacuated from their homes after a number of high-rise buildings were hit in the attack.
I was sleeping. I heard the explosion. The house shook. I got dressed and went out to have a look. The 6th floor balcony's on fire. My car is damaged. The glass was blown out.
There were very strong explosions. We were in the shelter. A security guard ran to us and said the house near the store was on fire. That's my house.
The drone attack caused destruction in a number of other cities, including Sumy, Odessa, Zaporizhia, and here in Kremenchuk. Ukraine has long been urging its allies to bolster its air defense systems to protect their sky and people from attacks exactly like these.
And Natalia Smolentceva is on that story for us from our studio in Riga. It's good to see you, Natalia. We now have the US president saying that he's prepared to move forward on new sanctions against Moscow. Could that force Russia to the negotiating table?
Well, so far we haven't seen a lot of willing to negotiate from Russian side. So I don't think this move will move Putin to go to the negotiation table just now. There's still a lot of ifs about this decision of President Trump. We have to see that Trump has threatened other countries with tariffs before that didn't come to effect, first of all. Then we'll have to see if these are secondary sanctions. What will countries like India do? Will they stop buying Russian oil or not? And then, of course, Russian economy has been long adapting to various sanctions. I don't have to say that Russian economy hasn't been affected by that. It has. But let's see how strong the sanctions will be and when they'll come into effect. This will be gradually, I suppose. And then we won't see probably Putin calling Zelensky today or tomorrow about this.
Have the secondary tariffs, these are the tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil, for example, like the ones that have been levied on India, have these affected Russia's economy?
Well, some U.S. officials certainly think so, that they will affect Russian economy. For instance, Scott Bassett said that Russian economy will collapse if more sanctions, and particularly those secondary sanctions on countries buying Russian oil, will be introduced. However, there are other Russian analysts who say that's might not be the case. India is indeed second larger buyer of Russian crude oil, but China is the first one, and there's no talk about imposing tariffs on China yet. So if India stops buying, the revenues will eventually decline. But Russian oil is already sold on discount, and it will force Russia to sell it even on more discount to China. It will eventually be harder to Russia to move oil globally and circumvent already existing Western sanctions. And also, it may scare other buyers of Russian crude oil, like, for instance, Turkey or Indonesia. And this can further isolate the country. And lastly, it can also make Russia more dependent on China. But as I said, there's a lot of ifs here.
Yeah, and I mean, you also said, you brought up the existing sanctions. And just give us a sense of what kind of an impact these have had on Russia's economy. Things like 18 rounds of sanctions from the European Union and others as well.
So sanctions, of course, is not a perfect mechanism. It's not a plug you can pull, and there are a lot of measures, and they, over the course of the past 3 years, they've been imposed both by the US and the European Union, and there are sanctions on energy sector, on bank sector, and other sectors of Russian economy. And these sanctions, you have to understand, they've been imposed gradually. And that's why their effect hasn't been so strong. Plus, there have been loopholes in those sanctions, sometimes even deliberate loopholes. And this allows Russia to continue selling its oil and gas even to European countries. And also, there is a general hesitancy to tackle the volume of Russian exports. They might be exporting to other countries, but the volume remains the same because there is a risk of higher energy prices, and everybody in the market knows about it. So this volume hasn't been tackled just yet. And also, Russian economy is adapting to the sanctions, as I said. It doesn't mean sanctions did not have any effect. They certainly have. But its economy, I guess, it's still far from collapsing.
And just very quickly, Natalia, Ukraine's also targeted oil pipelines in Russia. Have they been able to do any damage or much damage with those attacks?
Well, those pipelines still remain a way to get oil to European countries, even to Hungary and Slovakia. And the attack, for instance, on Druzhba pipeline in August caused a disruption for several days. But those disruptions are, I would say, a minor threat. Strikes on refineries are maybe a little bit bigger threat. It can amount to 10 to hundreds of millions of dollars in damage per facility. But Russia's overcapacity has actually buffered this economic blow so far. But beyond economics, these attacks project Ukraine's operational reach and deliver a political message that Ukraine can reach far into Russian territory and damage critical infrastructure. However, this damage, I wouldn't overestimate it so far.
All right, that's DW's Natalia Smolentceva in our Riga studio. Thanks very much for that, Natalia. I'm now joined by DW correspondent Anchal Vohra, who is in Brussels for us. Anchal, good to see you. So an EU team has travelled to the US in a push to get Washington to sanction Russia. Tell us more.
Well, it seems that they're trying to align their strategies when it comes to how to get Russian President Vladimir Putin on the table to talk about peace negotiations and get that process started. Now, Antonio Costa, who is the EU Council's president, has said that a European team is travelling to Washington to work with our American friends. He said this on Friday. The idea here is, at least from the European perspective, to get the American president to sanction Russia, essentially, to impose higher tariffs on Russia, something that he's said in the past but has wavered on recently. Even, lately he said, yes, I'm ready to do it, but without offering any more details. Europeans are trying to send a message that the EU and the US are together when it comes to getting a peace deal done, and that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is avoiding it. Now they're trying to get America on board to get Washington to coerce Russia with sanctions or higher tariffs to get the process moving.
Right. And meanwhile, the European Union is planning a new package of sanctions. What can we expect?
So this is the 19th package of sanctions. There have been 18 packages before. These have had limited results. They have, of course, reduced Russian earnings to quite an extent, but clearly haven't proved sufficient to deter Russian president, or encourage rather him to ending the war. He's still on the course that he decided earlier. However, the key thinking here now is that the most important sanctions that can be imposed are, in fact, secondary sanctions. This is also something that EU officials are expected to discuss with their US counterparts. Secondary sanctions are on countries that are helping Russia circumvent earlier sanctions on, all sorts of things, including purchase of Russian fossil fuels, which is what has been funding Russian a war machine. These countries are right at the top, China and then India. US has imposed secondary tariffs on India because India buys Russian oil, has been buying Russian oil over the 3 years of war. But when it comes to China, both the US and the EU have kind of remained quiet. So in this 19th package, the key thing is, what is the EU going to do? Are they going to just sanction some more Chinese companies involved in this circumvention, or will they actively stand up and proactively sanction the Chinese? According to reports, China is responsible for 80% of these Western anti-Russia sanctions.
All right, and that is where we'll leave it with DW's Anchal Vohra in Brussels. Thanks very much.